Why does Billionaires Row exist?
Well, it depends who you ask.
If you're a developer, you're trying to make as much money as possible on the tiniest plots of land on the planet.
If you're an engineer, you're trying to build quarter-mile high towers without the thing falling over.
And if you're a buyer, you're deciding where to spend millions of dollars on a home you'll never live in.
But if you're just a New Yorker, you're wondering why these homes sit empty while you're getting priced out of your own city.
A handful of giant towers, billions of dollars, and almost no one home.
But why build homes that nobody lives in? And why here? Why this exact strip of Manhattan?
Well, this thin strip along the park's southern edge is 57th Street. It's the closest wide street to Central Park, and this makes it some of the most valuable land on the planet, because on a wide street, New York City's zoning lets you build far more on the same lot. On top of that, the park itself can never be built on. Everywhere else in the city, you can buy a stunning view and then watch someone put up a tower next door and wall it off in a year. Facing the park, that can't happen. And from high enough up, you don't just see the most famous park on Earth. You look down on the whole thing like you own it.
But this part of Manhattan is already full. The big lots are long gone. What's left are these tiny, awkward little lots.
Exactly. You're buying a tiny piece of land for astronomical prices. So the only way to make your money back is to stack as many apartments on top of it as you can.
Which means building up.
As high as physics will let you go. But there's a catch. There's a legal cap on how much you can build on any lot in New York.
So how do they get around it?
Air rights. This is the part most people have never heard of. That cap, which is the unused space above your neighbor's short little building, can be bought and sold. So you go around to the low-rise buildings nearby, and you buy up all of the height they're never going to use, and you transfer it onto your own lot. Stack enough of it together, and suddenly you're legally allowed to build far, far higher than your little piece of ground should ever allow. They basically bought the sky over this entire block and moved it all onto one address.
So that's the recipe. Zoning laws that allow a ton of floor area, air rights from your neighbors that let you build tall, and you get a view nobody can ever block.
And once that recipe worked, it set off an arms race. Each tower trying to outdo the last. Taller, thinner, more expensive. New York City building code already calls a building slender at a width to height ratio of 1:7. These blew past it. The first tower was 1:8, then 1:15.
Until one of them went further than anyone ever had. The thinnest skyscraper on Earth, 1:24.
The Steinway building, but not that one. You gotta go up. Yep, keep going. Up. There you go.
The Steinway Tower is the perfect example of what it actually takes to build a skyscraper on Billionaires Row. And it starts with the building it's named after. The lot already has something on it, a landmarked 1925 building called Steinway Hall, and they were legally not allowed to touch it. So the space left to build on was a tiny lot, barely 60 feet wide, about the length of a tennis court going up more than a quarter of a mile.
All right, but we build skyscrapers like this all the time.
Not like this pencil tower though. They couldn't even start on clean ground because they had to fuse the new tower onto the century-old landmark. The old building is physically carrying part of the new one, and the lot was so cramped that there was nowhere to put anything. Every beam, every pour of concrete had to arrive in a timed window and go straight up on one of the busiest streets in Manhattan.
And halfway through, the money almost ran out and killed the project. Costs climbed, the luxury market cooled, and the lenders moved into foreclosure on a half-finished tower. The developers were trapped. If they walked away, they'd lose everything. So they doubled down and took on punishing new financing just to keep the cranes moving.
But somehow, it worked. The tower climbed all the way to its full height, which brings us to the hardest problem for the entire building, and it's not keeping it up.
But it's not keeping it up?
It's keeping it still. Here's the thing nobody expects about a tower this thin. It moves. In a strong wind, the top of this building sways, drifting a few feet to either side, slowly back and forth like a mast of a ship. And people who have felt it describe it like being on a boat. So when the wind really gets going, you can actually hear the structure groan.
Okay, but wait, that sounds like the building is failing. It's swaying and groaning, and people are still paying $60 million to live there?
That's the thing. The swaying is not a mistake. At more than 1,400 feet, the wind always wins. You cannot build a tower this tall and this thin and expect it to stand there rigid. A rigid tower that resists the wind snaps. So instead, engineers built it to bend, to flex with the wind and ride it out. The movement is the building doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
So if the swaying is fine, what's the actual problem?
The people inside. The building is structurally happy swaying back and forth, but a person standing in the living room is not. Move them slowly side to side, hundreds of feet into the air for hours, and they get seasick in their own apartment. So at this scale, the frontier of engineering isn't survival anymore. The tower will survive anything. The challenge is comfort. The whole problem becomes, how do you stop a quarter-mile-high pencil from making the people inside it nauseous?
And how do you do that?
You fight fire with fire, or motion with motion. Near the top, they hung a single enormous weight, 800 tons of steel, engineered to swing in the opposite direction to the building. So when the tower leans left, the weight pulls right. The two motions cancel out. It's called a tuned mass damper. But here's the part that makes it genius. You can't just bolt that weight to the building. If you did, it would move with the tower and double the sway instead of killing it. It has to hang free and react on its own instantly every time the tower moves. And that 800-ton counterweight is the heaviest of its kind anywhere in the world. It has one job: keep the people inside from feeling the building move.
But they couldn't plan for everything. The wind, the sway, the structure. They engineered all of that. What they didn't see coming was all of the stuff that falls off a building this tall. In 2020, a construction crane broke loose in high winds and rained debris down onto the street.
And then there's the ice. In winter, the ice forms on the facade hundreds of feet up. And the wind then peels it off, and it falls a quarter of a mile onto the sidewalk. And it got so bad, the city had to repeatedly close the streets below because chunks of ice were falling from the sky.
And that's the thing you can't just fix. A tower this size needs a buffer around it. But this is Manhattan. There is no buffer. The Steinway Tower is just too big for the street it stands on.
And so is the next one and the one after that.
They cause problems for almost everyone around them, and almost nobody lives up there.
Which brings us back to the first question. Why build homes that no one's going to live in?
Billionaires Row was never meant to be a home for anyone. It exists to store money. A place to park tens of millions of dollars somewhere safer than the stock market. They've turned the home from a shelter into a financial asset.
But now there are 772 apartments across all of Billionaires Row, worth about $17 billion.
If they spent that money in Queens, they could have built around 70,000 homes, which is enough to house nearly 175,000 people.
But put those same towers in Queens, and they're worth a fraction of that. And 772 apartments was never going to solve New York City's housing crisis anyways, so at least we got a beautiful looking skyline from it.
Absolutely not. It completely destroyed the skyline. And the thing is, we're still left with the same question. Was it worth it? Is New York better off with or without it?
Maybe that's the wrong question. The housing crisis existed long before the first cranes went up on 57th Street.
Okay, sure, it didn't create the problem. But the thing is, it didn't fix it either.
But if that spotlight shows us a better way to build housing, then maybe Billionaires Row was worth building.